last thing we want to do here is criminalise, because when we criminalise, we give the people who say these sorts of things a soapbox to be able to talk about these things as loudly as they like, and possibly convince people who are on the border. It makes these people more prominent. Currently, if someone talks about colonialism to write an article, it's ridiculed. It's not put on the front page of important source of information, and so they don't get that sort of stamp to talk on. So in this debate, I'm going to talk about three things. Firstly, why it's not principally justified. Secondly, why legalising it shuts down beneficial discussion. And thirdly, whether or not it's necessary and efficient in terms of solving these sorts of problems. First, some rebuttal along three sort of categories. So firstly, this question about why we ban. So firstly, we don't support a Holocaust ban. We think that there's a difference, but even if we did, there's a difference here, and the difference is that we're just questioning whether or not the Holocaust occurred, which is a question of fact, and this is a question of not whether or not colonialism occurred, not whether or not bad things happened, but when you consider the bad things that happened and some of the better things that have happened because of this, for example, arbitrary state boundaries which allow some peace in particular regions, like having infrastructure that wouldn't otherwise probably not have been there. The question is, to what extent was it a good thing? To what extent is it a bad thing? And we move through that. So that's where there's a difference. If that's okay. Next is this question of whether to what extent the colonisers control the narrative. So one thing is that they already do have a voice, certainly within their own communities, in that they're able to rebut these sorts of things. In Korea, they don't sort of walk around thinking, yes, the Japanese colonialists, it was a great thing what they did. They have control of their own narrative in their own community. So they already do have a voice. And also sort of adding to this is that most academics in the sorts of communities that we care about don't actually believe these sorts of claims about that colonialism was an entirely good thing. So there's that. Next is this sort of practical stuff about the Japanese government and whether or not we should ban these politicians from saying this sort of thing. The Japanese government itself does not say these sorts of things about colonialism being an entirely good thing. Shinzo Abe did not, the Prime Minister of Japan, no longer visits the shrines of war criminals. He doesn't think that it was a good thing entirely what happened. So that's an important thing. So these practical issues about whether or not you should ban these things. The important thing is that the Japanese government itself, a source of authority, doesn't believe these things.
On that side?
No. So into my case. Why is it principally justified? So we think it's not principally justified. The principle is freedom of speech should not be criminalised except in the most extreme of circumstances. So there are a few reasons. One reason is freedom of speech is self-correcting. So we have a marketplace of ideas. If people come out and they say an idea which is widely accepted as being a silly idea, then the idea will be slammed. So an example would be if I came out and wrote an op-ed saying that slavery was just an entirely good thing and that we should get it back, I would be slammed and ridiculed because the idea is stupid. So this freedom of speech allows for really stupid ideas to be corrected. And so a claim that colonialism was an entirely good thing would have that sort of treatment. Secondly, freedom of speech can be illuminated in ways governments can't predict. So for example, a discussion of colonialism is important because the problems in Africa, they are partially to do with colonialism, but also partially they could be to do with culture, to do with ethnic rivalries, to do with state meddling. These actual specific effects of colonialism on the state of Africa, on African states now, is really important to fully understand. And if you quash that freedom of speech, you don't get that central discussion. The only exceptions to this sort of thing is when there's a direct incitement to violence. Offence should not be the criteria, and it generally isn't. Yeah, I'll take it.
Do you think the debate on colonisation perhaps happens in more subtle ways than just net good versus net bad?
Sure, maybe, but the question is whether the thing that we need to do is actually talk about it so we can actually have a full understanding of the effects of it. Okay. Second, legalising shuts down beneficial discussion. So firstly, essential debate needs to be had. I mean, like this one essential debate needs to be had. Why are some states unsuccessful? And in this, colonialism is part of the explanation. It is not everything. You shut down the discussion. You allow states to evade accountability. So, for example, there are problems in Zimbabwe at the moment. They are not entirely to do with colonialism. But if you allow this sort of discussion to be banned, then there's a Zimbabwe in the international stage and say it was entirely colonialism. This is all it was, and you're not allowed to respond to that in the West if you want to. So this allows them to avoid the responsibility and then ultimately not have the discussions that are really important to have. Secondly, it's problematic because there have been benefits to colonialism. It's not an entirely bad thing. You get infrastructure, you get roads, you get some fairly brutally effective suppression of ethnic conflict. It's not about whether or not it was nice. It's about we need to have the debate on exactly what the effects are. If you ban this sort of thing, academics talk about this. You get a chilling effect. You won't talk about colonialism at all because you can't, because you might say something that's a little bit wrong and then you're penalised and not seen as a legitimate part of the academic community. It's important to talk about the exact effects of this. So there's that. Finally, is it necessary? Is it an efficient way of dealing with problems? The first question about necessity, it's not like the Holocaust denial. There's no constant stream sort of denying colonialism like you get denying the Holocaust sort of popping up occasionally in these news sources. The harms that are claimed don't flow because you don't have this sort of constant stream of people talking about it. Secondly, this question of whether or not it's efficient. So one thing is, it's really hard to enforce these things, like a ban on freedom of speech of these sorts. You can't, you can chat in pubs, you can talk to people around you, and people will continue to do that. And more importantly, criminalising this sort of speech lends credibility to those who have these views because it seems like the government is suppressing them and stopping them from talking about things which could be true. It won't change the crazies, but it might sway people who are sort of on the edge when you give them that soapbox. And for these reasons, we oppose.